All right, you ready to talk about Flowers for Algernon?
That's the one with the kid with the chains and the goggles. He gets shotgunned at the end.
No, that's Harrison Bergeron.
Oh yeah, the guy who did Hollywood Squares.
No, that's Tom Bergeron.
Aha, brother of Menelaus.
That's Agamemnon!
Bum bum bum, literature gets a look. Let's talk about books.
And welcome back to Legs Talk About Books, the bi-yearly podcast where we talk about books. I'm Hardleg Joe, if you didn't know, joined as always by my friend and compatriot, CB Radio.
I'm back from the Shadowlands.
You're back from the... We're both back from the Shadowlands.
I mean, you didn't stop being in the Shadowlands. You do Yu-Gi-Oh! You were in the Shadow Realm.
Yeah, I've escaped from the Shadow Realm many times, but this channel has just been like... Ghost Town, we haven't been uploading a whole lot.
We haven't read Ghost Town, though.
No, we haven't read Ghost Town.
No.
But we're here, we're back, thanks to a Patreon request from Frankly I'm a Person, who really wanted us to read a book, and he chose Flowers for Algernon by Daniel Keyes, a classic of literature. A lot of people apparently read this in high school. I assume you haven't.
No, I didn't.
No.
Much like I didn't realize our patron's name was Frankly I'm a Person.
Yeah.
That threw me.
It's a little weird, I know. We just call him Frankly. It's fine.
That's fine. Yeah.
It's fine. We're good. And yeah, so that's why we're here. We decided to read this book. I mean, it's something that was on my list. I already owned a copy of this because I was hoping to read it eventually.
Oddly enough, I've already known the story of this for the most part, simply because the amount of homages and spoofs to this.
Yeah, it's been parodied like hundreds of times.
So many times.
And retold. It's really one of those stories that, like, even if you're not familiar with the name, like, you've kind of heard this story.
You've seen an episode of this.
And before. I guess we could do a very basic synopsis for anyone who's completely unfamiliar with it. It's basically a young, mentally challenged man named Charlie takes part in an experiment where they do surgery on him and it increases his IQ tenfold, exponentially, yeah. I won't spoil the rest, but it with that basic of premise, going from less intelligent to more intelligent, there's a whole bunch of different stories that unfold, talking about the nature of, like, what is your personality, to how being intelligent affects you, to how people treat you differently. There's just so many ways to cover it.
I've seen it covered in comic books.
Yeah.
Literally, there's an homage to it in a Spider-Man comic book where the Rhino becomes hyper-intelligent. Yeah. It is such a universal...
yeah, I mean, there's a Star Trek episode based off of it. There's a Simpsons episode famously based off of it.
Yeah.
Where, if you've ever seen it, the one where Homer has a crayon in his brain and they take it out. It could increase your thinking power, or it could kill you.
Increase my killing power, eh?
I'll do it.
Oh, God.
So yeah, classic literature, reading it for the first time. And if you're unfamiliar with this show, how we do things, usually we have a spoiler-free section where we talk about what we liked about the book, what we didn't like, general, like, ratings, who would maybe enjoy reading this. And then after that, we're either just going to assume that you've read it, or that you're not going to read it. And we just jump into spoiler talk about all the highly specific things and scenes that we enjoyed from this, all the interesting thought experiments that come out of reading a book like this. And there should be chapter codes. This is on YouTube, nowhere else. Use the chapter codes, very important.
Yep.
And yeah, let's just go ahead and jump into this, and I'll throw it over to you since I've been rambling. What did you think of Flowers for Algernon?
Flowers for Algernon, I feel like we both, like the last couple of books that we've done, if anybody's keeping a score on this, we've been kind of back and forth on whether or not we like or not.
Yeah, we've been a little divided.
A little bit divided. I think on this one, we are both unanimously in like, this is a classic, and for a reason, a damn good classic. And
there's a reason this is classic, a reason it's been parodied. It, despite being 60 years old, it holds up very well even today.
And this is nothing spoilerish. It's just more of an overview of the format of it.
There's a word for it, but I can never pronounce it right. I think it's epistolary, where a story is told through letters.
Yeah, like that's what, and that was the big shocker for me, was like...
the format of this, that it was journal entries, essentially.
Yeah, and it's really neat that, like, I feel like this is maybe not a dying thing, but you don't hear as many stories that try for it.
Yeah.
But
there's not as many stories now that take this old format, but you were pointing out before we recorded, like, yeah, this is something Frankenstein did, this is something that Bram Stoker's Dracula did.
And they were all, those were, like, horror and sci-fi in general, they were giant pushes forward for either of those things. Admittedly, I think Frankenstein is considered like the first sci-fi.
Yeah, one of the first, the forefathers of sci-fi.
Yeah.
They're the only modern story I can think of, and I haven't read it myself, but I've heard about it. This Is How You Lose the Time War. You familiar with that one?
I have not heard of that one.
Well, it's basically two time-traveling spies from the future who are going back in time to try to sabotage each other, and they leave notes sort of taunting each other, but then as they read more notes and they keep encountering each other, they slowly fall in love.
Oh, that's interesting.
And it takes place, I believe, over a lot of instant messages and, like, notes and letters being left behind, depending on the time period.
That's pretty cool. Not to throw off too much on topic, House of Leaves isn't written like that?
House of Leaves is... It's written in a lot of different ways. Let's put it that way.
Okay, I didn't... Yeah.
There are some letters. There's also, like, a formal scientific paper. There's also, like, a journal. There's also, like, articles and pictures and there's all sorts of stuff in
There's
there.
no pictures in this, but they do kind of go from different... There are some other, like, article-based ones, but it's primarily journal entries.
It's primarily Charlie's journal as he gains more intelligence. And one interesting thing I guess we should bring up, because you listened to the audiobook of this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the actual written book, the beginning is a little difficult to read because since Charlie is barely literate, his first several entries are full of spelling mistakes, no grammar, no punctuation, no capitalization. You have to read everything phonetically. And despite myself, his voice kind of comes through in my head as sort of like, today I learned about the thing.
Yeah.
It's this very simplistic, almost like caveman talk. That then gets more and more detailed as it goes along. More eloquent. And I'm not sure how that came through in the
voice
audiobook.
acting for the audiobook did play really well into that. The way he spoke it and said things sounded more wide-eyed and more like childlike.
Yeah.
And that was...
It's written very well in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it may sound almost like an insult to be like, I could hear this dopey voice in my head, but the fact that tone kind of comes through without being completely stereotypical, like, it works really well in its favor. And there's actually a few points in this talking about House of Leaves where they mess with the formatting. There's one particular chapter where I'm like, I don't know how they do this in the audiobook, where as he's getting more intelligent, he learns about all the different punctuation marks, and he starts experimenting with them. He'll put, like, a period in between every word. He uses a whole bunch of semicolons. Mm-hmm. When they first tell him to start using punctuation, he does that thing where he just throws a big line of it. He's like, there's a whole bunch of it. You could put it where it needs to be.
Yeah, no, the most adorable thing in the entire book for me is the journal entry where he learns commas. Because the voice actor, like I said, has this very childlike thing. And the way he says it, like the first sentence he says, and I can still hear it in my head, I learned how to use commas. And it's literally, I can see him writing it down as I, have, learned how. It's just like, chameleon over here.
Yeah.
And it's just this very, like, that's adorable.
Yeah, it's very childlike in the way that, he's just basically advancing through this, learning about all the mysteries of the world. Mm-hmm. And the beginning is very, very optimistic. And then as it goes on, it gets a little bit darker. But we won't ruin all that here. Again, we've kind of gotten a little bit too far into spoilers.
We have, but I think I already hit the nail on the head for our spoiler-free discussion on that we like it.
Yeah.
This is a book that we both wholeheartedly, if we had more of a format than this, we would say go read it. It is a fantastic book.
Yeah, this is usually when I talk about recommending a book, I'll be like, oh, if you like this, you read it. Or if this kind of story appeals to you. And this is one of the few books where I can legitimately say, like, I would recommend it to everyone. No matter what kind of stories you like, you'll find something here to enjoy. Mm-hmm. Like, at its core, it's just a high-concept science fiction story, so if you like those things, like, that's there. But it uses that fascinating premise to tell a very grounded and deeply personal, interconnected story about, like, one man's life and his relationship with others. The only thing I could really say it's missing is there's not a lot of action.
Mm-hmm.
There's no, like, chases.
Oh, there is a chase.
There is, like, but it's very, very brief. So if you're someone who really needs, like, fists to be thrown or for there to be, like, stakes where someone could die at any moment, you won't enjoy this. But anything else, you'll enjoy this.
If you want a deeply personal and well-written story about something that is an interesting idea, and you don't need to have some train rolling down the tracks with somebody on top of it, you're going to be fine. This will be good for you.
And also, I guess it's worth noting that this is pretty short. I think I read it in like 6 hours. I'm not sure if you remember how long the audiobook was.
It was like about 6 or 9 hours. It didn't take long, and admittedly, the first several chapters, because they're so simply written, if you're listening on audiobook, will go by within like the first half hour.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The way the letters are laid out and the way it's paced, it really just flows by. I think, like I said, 6 hours, and that was over 2 days, where I just sat down and I started reading, and the letters just went by. I just wanted to go into the next one. You kept going and going, and before I knew it, story was half done.
Yeah.
And then the next day I sat down to read it and just ended up going through the rest of it, because I was like, I gotta know what happens. I gotta find out. I gotta keep going. And yeah, I think that just about covers it for the spoiler-free thoughts. Like, it's good. Go check it out. 10 out of 10.
Four thumbs up.
Yeah, exactly. From there, I think we're just going to talk about the story itself, everything that we liked about it. And despite what I said earlier, I guess we should go ahead and just give a brief synopsis, a rundown of what actually happens.
I mean, admittedly, we stopped halway through the actual synopsis.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
We got halfway there. He got really smart. What happens from there? Well, eventually he learns that it only lasts for a short amount of time, and he's gonna go back to the way he was before, perhaps even be worse.
The worst part, is he gets to experience the downward slope of that, and also know that slope is coming. That's the main gut punch of the book. Yeah,
just sort of this idea of they talk a lot about innocence in this book. The idea that before Charlie had the operation, he wasn't very well off. He basically works at a bakery, just like sweeping up and doing deliveries, and he thinks everyone he works with is his friend. And as he gets more intelligent, he realized, like, oh, actually they were mocking me a lot of time. Actually, I was the butt of almost everyone's jokes, and they didn't respect me, and they thought I was a buffoon, and it was only my own ignorance that kept me from realizing that. And as he starts to decline again, that doesn't return. Like, he's still aware that these people were making fun of him, or these people don't actually like him as much. So he's lost the innocence of, like, thinking that the world is a brighter, happier place.
That, and also, primarily the people that saw him as a joke see him as not a joke, and when he returns as that same state, they are unable to see him in that sense again.
They feel a lot more pity for him.
Well, it's more of rage, actually.
You're talking about when he's intelligent. They get, like, really angry at him.
They get angry at him, and when he comes back from that intelligence, some of them are still very angry at him.
Yeah, I feel like near the end, and granted it's been a couple weeks at this point, because we haven't had an easy chance to record this.
Yeah.
But I thought near the end when he comes back, people, once they realized his decline was again, they were like, oh, I'm so sorry, Charlie. Like, you can have your job back. And he's like, I don't need your pity. He still realized that they were being condescending, but he didn't have the words to express it anymore, and he didn't know how he knew that necessarily.
I thought he reached a point where that didn't happen. Where, like, he didn't realize that they were being condescending, and he, like, there was the one part where he goes back to his reading and writing class and traumatizes the woman that he loved.
Yeah.
And that loved him back. And, yeah.
And but that's the sort of the same thing. He tries to go back to his old life and realizes, like, he's having an effect on people. People don't treat him the same. Things aren't how they used to be. And he may not necessarily remember the past with clarity, but the emotional impact still weighs on him.
Yeah. And before we get into more good stuff about this story, I do want to talk about the one kind of it might, for people who are going to be reading this for the first time, it might be a little bit off-putting.
Oh, yeah. I guess just the language thing, is that what you're talking about?
Oh, no, actually, that's...
Or the sexual stuff?
No, not even that, actually.
Oh, okay.
It's somewhat... It's an older book, so it's misunderstanding of the subconscious.
Oh, yeah.
And it's understanding... There's a lot of scenes where they kind of make it seem like older, dumb Charlie is a separate entity than smart Charlie, and they are kind of at war with each other inside their head.
Yeah.
And it does kind of take a lot of the emotional kick out of some things, and it also adds some emotional kick to it, but like that part was a little bit like, yeah, this...
It was a little weird.
Yeah.
Some of the way they talk about IQ a little bit is outdated as well. I mean, this was written in, I believe, the early 50s, so there's a lot of stuff about it that's outdated. But to me, I think the thing about it that works is even if you understand that, like, the subconscious isn't literally a voice inside your head, the imagery of having his past self judging his current actions, it's powerful enough to sort of stand as just, like, imagery. Like, you could just assume it's a metaphor and not actually a subconscious.
That is a good point.
Even if he treats it that way.
That is a good point, and nuts to you for thinking that my subconscious doesn't speak to me. But no.
My subconscious is a great man. You don't know what he's been through.
You don't know the wars. But also, yeah, to touch on those other parts that you were talking about, the language used in this, it does...
It is also outdated. I guess it is, I'd almost say like a warning, but I'm not sure if... See, the thing about it is that it uses one very particular word. They say that Charlie goes to the school for retarded adults. And they go out of their way to say, like, that's the polite term. That is the technical term. Because at the time, it was. And since then, that word has taken on, like, slur status. Like, that is almost universally seen as an insult. You wouldn't put that on, like, a sign of a school, you know?
Yeah.
You wouldn't send it there. But here they drop that a lot. So if that's a word that, like, really bothers you, if you have a history with that, like, just be aware. It was an entirely different time.
And you might actually, if you can find an edited copy, then seek it out.
I'm not sure if they did an edited copy.
You never know.
But it is just really interesting to me, because they talk about that, where they specifically say, like, the R word is a polite term over diminished, which is something I've never heard, like, I think I might have heard something like, you have diminished intelligence, but I've never heard them describe, like, a child as mentally diminished. Obviously I've heard, like, he's dim, but I always just thought of, like, the lights, the nights, he's not as bright. But apparently diminished and bright were also technical terms, like in the 1920s. That is how, like, educators and scientists referred to people with, like, mental difficulties, neurotypical people.
Yeah.
And then eventually those kind of became slurs by the 1950s, where they're like, no, I would never call you dim. And nowadays, like, well, that word doesn't hold, like, any weight or whatever.
And then there's stuff like dumb, which started off as just being unable to speak. It was basically being mute.
Yeah.
And has now just been fully turned into you lack intelligence.
Yeah. I believe stupid and moron were also originally, like, technical terms. I went down this rabbit hole of looking, like, the origins, and they make an interesting point where they actually kind of predict, they're like, I'm sure the language we use now will be offensive in the future, because anytime you have a word for someone who is lesser or less intelligent, it almost inherently is going to become offensive. It's going to be used as an insult as it becomes more well-known. And it got me thinking, because I think the term we would use now would be, like, neurodivergent or neurotypical. And those are seen as almost, like, very clinical words. And it makes me wonder, like, 10 years down the line, are kids going to be running around like, well, you're just divergent?
Well, it's also, the funny thing is, we've already gone through one with the word slow.
Yeah.
But
well, even, I was going to say, like, mentally challenged is one of those things where, like, it's still got a little bit of that, like, politically correct language to it, but you could use that as an insult, absolutely, and I've heard people do that.
Yeah. And so, yeah, like, this is definitely a book of its times, and so you definitely are going to have to be cautious of its language.
But it is also, like I said, it's something that's almost universal because it's so aware that it's a book of its times.
Mm-hmm.
It, like, accounts for that. And that's, like, it's so smartly written, I think, because of that.
But I will say that the only thing that it does not really catch up on that one is its use of sex. Its use of sex is very 1950s.
Yeah.
And also just kind of... It's
very much like assuming, like, what I like must be what everyone likes.
Yeah, so that part, we won't speak too much on that, but that, another fair warning on that.
Yeah. If you've seen the previous episode, you know I'm pretty cavalier about, like, oh yeah, sex is an important topic to talk about in literature or whatever, if it comes up. And this does have some stuff about it, but nothing that I really thought was super interesting, because it's pretty basic, like, sex is kind of important. People get really neurotic around it.
I don't know what you're talking about.
But yeah, that is there, but only because it covers almost the entire breadth of, like, human experience.
Mm-hmm.
This goes into, like, religion, sex, education, concept of the self, how you interact with others, how society views people. And speaking of the things it's talked about, one that I found the most interesting was the isolating effect of intelligence. Mm-hmm. I think this is something that almost every parody kind of hammers on. This idea that as you become smarter than the people around you, it divides you from them.
Yes.
It kind of separates you from them. And it's one of those things that's almost kind of hard to talk about, because anytime you try to go to people and be like, you know what it feels like to be smarter than everyone else? Like... It just sounds like you're the most arrogant guy who ever lived, you know?
But also the smartest.
But also the smartest. I must be smart. Why else am I feeling like everyone hates me? It can't be because I'm an asshole. No, I was going to say the thing about it is I think if you had shown me this when I was younger, I wouldn't necessarily have gotten it. Mm-hmm. But I understand it now, not because of intelligence, but because this same principle applies to, like, gaming, of all things. It's
do tell.
If you've ever been that guy who, like, your friends get a fighting game and you're the one who sits down with the fighting game in your off time and, like, learns combos, and, like, at first you're all having fun because you're all somewhat evenly matched, and then as your skill improves and you start dominating more and more of them, suddenly you become that guy. Your friends don't want to play against that guy because that guy always wins and it's not fun anymore.
You know, that guy could just put down the game controller. Yeah. Stop playing the card games. I mean, hypothetically, that's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Like I said, I've seen other friends become this with fighting games specifically.
Oh yeah, no, I have a friend of mine that has it's gone down this rabbit hole before.
Yeah, I had a friend who was like that with the original Halo, where it was just like, no one wanted to... He loved the game. He loved to play. No one wanted to play with him. And it was weird because I'd like to think, like, I didn't treat him with animosity. But I had friends that would, like, get really grumpy, really upset. And he'd always... The thing was, he wasn't, like, arrogant about it. He was always like, I can teach you things. I can help you. And that made people even more upset about it.
That's because nobody wants to be the idiot in a situation.
Yeah.
The power dynamic of intelligence is something that is difficult to understand in the sense that wisdom is typically adhered to that, but when it's somebody around your same age or someone that you previously perceived as not to be an expert, it's hard to flip that emotional state on its end.
Yeah. I was actually reading up about the author and how he came up with this idea. And he talks about, he came from a blue-collar family. Like, his dad was, like, an auto worker, and his mom was, like, a waitress or whatever. And they saved up and sent him to college. He went to college for a short time to be a doctor before becoming a writer. And he talks about, like, after his first year of college, he was so much more intelligent than his parents because he had he'd learned so much more than them. And they'd be, like, watching the TV, and he'd be, like, trying to explain stuff. And they'd be like, will you just shut up and watch the TV? It's like, he's like, it drove such a wedge between me, because anytime you have someone like a son who you think of as like, oh, I'm smarter than them, and then they surpass you, it's just like, no, I can't allow it.
I don't know why, but my first thoughts are Zoolander. I'm a merman. A merman, father.
Gonna be a writer, not a doctor.
Oh,
But doctors make more money. You don't understand, Dad. There's philosophical implications to being a doctor. I don't know about no philosophicals, but if you need some bed sheets or something, I can buy you some. Son.
Son, you could deal with my gout.
Yeah.
Maybe, Dad, you could definitely get done with that gout if you stop eating such salty foods. I don't see any connections between this as he digs into a giant piece of chicken.
I'm so American, I piss red, white, and blue. Doctor says it's pancreatic cancer. I told him to shut his commie mouth. But yeah, my point is, I think I can take that experience and apply it to like, oh, if I became a genius, it would be kind of like being really good at Yu-Gi-Oh! Around my friends, just with everything.
Yeah.
And I can see how isolating that would be. I can see how people, despite their best efforts, would start to feel angry and upset. Their emotions would get the better of them. Because people just don't like to be outplayed by someone.
And also, to be honest, it is also a lot of just straight up intelligence as opposed to emotional intelligence.
Yeah.
Which he gains slightly and very much. You can actually, that's a really good point on this, is that you can see his intelligence grow by leaps and bounds, but his emotional intelligence is 5 steps behind him this entire time.
Yeah.
And
I feel like that's one of the things that the book was kind of ahead of the curve on. I feel like we have a better understanding of it now.
Mm-hmm.
But especially back then, you can sense that, like, the doctors know his emotional intelligence hasn't caught up.
Mm-hmm.
But they're like, we don't know how to teach you that. Like, emotions is something you just kind of learn naturally as you grow.
Hell, Alice, I think her name was.
Yeah.
Alice knew it. She was she's a natural teacher right there. And
yeah.
she was able to be like, all right, I know you care for me and all stuff, but you're only going to get smarter and you're not catching up to it emotionally and you're not thinking about it that way.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be caught in the wake of that disparity.
Yeah. And it's one of those things, too, where he kind of seems in the middle. Like, he's like, okay, I'm smart enough to realize that my emotional intelligence needs to grow and I can do some stuff to grow it. And he thinks that maybe that'll cure his melancholy, the isolation and depression he feels. And one of the, like, sort of big gut punches is, no, even when he overcomes all his problems, he still feels alone, being the smartest man in the room.
Mm-hmm.
He still feels cut off from even all the doctors or whatever, because they all resent him for having more intelligence. Even though he can help them, they don't want his help.
Yeah. Now that we've reached the peak of his intelligence, I think we can start on the curve downward, which is where a lot of the actual emotional gut punches hit.
Yeah.
I want to send out a shout out to just a small one that kind of stuck with me, is the moment that he was looking at a paper and realized he didn't know German anymore.
Yeah. He learns like every language.
He learned so many damn languages, and ancient languages too. And that moment there isn't so much of like, that's an emotional gut punch. That's a frightening horror moment right there.
It's an existential moment.
Where you're like, yes, this fundamental thing that's part of your understanding of the world has just left you overnight.
Yeah. I used to be able to read all these things, and now suddenly I have 10% of the knowledge I had before.
Yeah,
10% of the access to the world.
Yeah, and that was just a really good, frightening moment that was kind of glossed over, but I liked it.
Yeah, it was a very good one. But I will say this whole, like, rise and fall, going back to, you had talked briefly about this almost feeling like an old fable or an old legend. This is one of those tales that, even though it's only 60 years old, it feels like it could have been written in ancient times. It feels like there should be a story in the Bible about a man who becomes too smart or something.
And there really is. There's several stories in, like, older ancient literatures, kind of like Cassandra, whose knowledge was a burden of her own kind.
Yeah.
But that
was more like a curse, right?
That was a curse, and that one's, yeah. The biblical one, as Snap Suspenders,
as our resident biblical scholar.
Our resident somewhat biblical scholar. The story of Solomon is actually a story of that, in the sense that Solomon's story after his initial birth and the turmoil involved of that, as well as his succession, makes a plea to God towards with offerings, and God comes to him and says, I will grant you whatever you want. And he says, I wish to have the wisdom to rule this country. and God gives him the wisdom to do that. But if you follow the books that he has written in the Bible or in the Hebrew Bible of sorts of the Songs of Solomon, many of the almost all the Proverbs, some of the Psalms, I believe, and then you go to like Ecclesiastes, like all these the top 3 ones I just talked about. There's a lot of good information in them, and some of them are much more optimistic. The Proverbs deal with a lot of quarreling wives. He had 500. He had a lot of quarrels. And then you get to Ecclesiastes, and Ecclesiastes is the one book that every time I've heard a Bible study go for it, there's a big all right, it's going to get dark. It's going to get sad. Because it talks about a lot about like, yes, all these things in life, to have great riches, to do great things, all this, it's vanity. It's such small things.
It means nothing.
It means nothing. And to just see that as a progression of Solomon's intelligence and the emotional, it kind of mirrors this story of Algernon, or not Algernon, of Charlie in Flowers for Algernon.
Yeah.
On that. And that's been my church corner.
It's just one of those things where it does feel like an ancient story. And I guess in some ways it is, but although, does the Bible actually like point out that like Solomon was made miserable by his wisdom?
That's Ecclesiastes.
Okay.
Like he wrote it's more than heavily implied that he wrote in Ecclesiastes. Not only was he like the smartest man, but he's also considered the richest of kings.
Yeah.
To the point where like the Queen of Sheba, we've all heard of that term before. The Queen of Sheba came to his domain and literally was like, "Holy crap, this takes my breath away." He had everything, and in all of that excess, he realized the necessity of other smaller things, and considered the excesses to be hevel, as the word is called, or smoke, or intangible to be caught.
Gotcha.
If we want more Bible studies, you'd feel free to ask. I got this. I don't got this stuff on lock, but I would love to do that. But
Brandon Bible's side channel.
CB Radio, Christian Brandon Radio. Let's do this.
Let's talk about the Bible.
Let's talk about the Bible.
Just the one book.
Well, I could talk about almost all of it. But we have gotten off topic, and I appreciate the divergence of topic. But it's definitely this is a very simple story that they packed a lot of emotion into it, and I just really want to get down to the parts of this story that really hit home for you.
Oh, you want to talk about the thing? So when we were talking about this, Frankly, who again requested this, he had talked about there's a moment in this book that made him cry, even when he was a high schooler. Because there's, let's see, I have it written down here, actually.
And the funny thing is, like, when you told me about this, like, I was like, before I read this, I'm like, I'm not going to be crying at this book. And I had my own moment.
Yeah.
We each had our own moments. So,
yeah. Well, I was going to say, so, there's a part where Charlie, after gaining his intelligence, but learning that he might lose it, goes to, like, a home for the mentally infirm, where he is most likely going to be sent if his intelligence declines any more than it used to be, if he can no longer, like, work on his own. And the conditions there are pretty bad. There's clearly doctors and nurses who want to help, but people are kind of, like, lying in their own filth. They're kind of just, like, shoveling around. They don't have any, like, meaningful lives. They're just kind of existing.
They're kept in a literal, like, just kind of cage /
yeah,
like it basically picture a big old shack that they toss them into.
It's a big daycare. And they mention even they're like, oh, this is the better ones. These are the ones that can walk and talk. There are some that are essentially like grown babies where they just lay in their own filth and we have to change their diapers or whatever. And a lot of that really got to Frankly. Apparently when he was younger, he had some history with mental institutions. And just hearing about the conditions and seeing Charlie sort of in this woe about this is where I might end up, it really affected him.
And it's sad that that's actually like the final sting of the book is that he
might be going back there.
No, that he is. Like that's the letter he writes is that he's going to the home. He actually made the choice. He said, if I'm going to go, I'm going to make the choice. And at the end, before the final line of leave some flowers for Algernon, he says, I'm going to be taking myself to that mental institution.
I think, what was it? I remember reading that the implication actually in his words that he was going to take his own life. And that he was being like, I'm going to go away. Not going away to that place, but leaving. And that's why the whole flowers for Algernon. Which I guess we should explain if you don't know, like, why is this book called Flowers for Algernon when the main character is Charlie? Algernon is a small lab mouse that they do the procedure to before Charlie. They test it on this mouse, and the mouse gets super intelligent. And then when Charlie becomes intelligent, he feels a kinship with this mouse. He helps it break out of the lab, and he and the mouse live in an apartment for a while, and he builds this huge, elaborate, like, thing so he can finally run around and, like, not feel trapped in a cage. And then he gets to see, since Algernon got the thing before him, his intelligence declines. He eventually becomes not just a rat again, but less intelligent, and then dies. Mm-hmm. And so the final words are, don't worry about me, but leave some flowers for Algernon. Yeah. Because he buries them in the backyard.
The way I heard it in the audiobook was, I'm going away. Please leave some flowers on Algernon's grave, as he would be at the home and he would not be able to go.
Yeah. It could be either way. I think it's left a little bit vague, or maybe I'm just reading too much into it.
Yeah, he's fully succumbed to the idea that he is unintelligent and will remain and only get worse.
And I mean, that's the thing. Algernon, died from whatever the experiment. That was a side effect.
Yeah.
Hell of a side effect, I tell you what. Yeah. In my experience, we call that an effect. Yeah. Side? No, if you're dead, that's an effect, brother.
If that card destroys a monster, it's an effect. That's not a side effect.
Shut up. But yeah. Going back, so there's a lot of really sad moments in this, especially near the tail end. That part really hit frankly. And what's interesting is, as you said, you and I both had our own moments where we teared up. But they were completely different moments. Because this book covers so many different things, it feels like everyone has something that just, like, hits home for them. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious if you have read this book, what was your moment? I'd like to know down in the comments.
Please tell us, yeah.
And then, Brandon, did you want to share what was the one that did it for you?
I was wondering if you were going to go or if I was going to go. But for me, it's this, the scene once he gets intelligent, he starts making a small plan to go see his sister. And his mother, which you throughout the book find more and more and more problematic stories about his past.
Yeah.
And there's actually a 1-2 punch. He finds out that his father left his mother, and his father was one of the few people in these flashbacks that we keep getting that was nurturing.
Not just nurturing, but he kind of accepted Charlie for what he was.
Whichever way it was.
His mom was always like, we need to find some way to make him smarter, which included sending him to a weird quack doctor who, like, said he could do some weird experiments that would unlock his thinking power. She spent all this money, she went to all these different people because she just didn't like the idea that Charlie wasn't going to be like all the other kids.
And also...
And his dad was always just like, the boy's gonna be what he is. Like, love him for what he is. Like, stop trying to fix him.
And the sister of his also was, just did this incredibly terrible thing to him.
Yeah. She was just cruel throughout. I mean, she wasn't entirely cruel, but it's one of those things that they definitely frame as she, growing up, had to live with being mocked because her brother was the dumb kid.
Yeah, and that was kind of part of my 1-2 punch, is him going to see his mother and his sister, and seeing his mother just be this shell of a human being that
she's going senile.
She's going full senile.
So she's losing her mental faculties now.
But also the sister that, in the beginning of the story, wrote him off, literally.
Yeah.
Because she didn't know if he died.
Yeah.
And then all this stuff. And then she meets him again, and her remorse is real.
Yeah.
And it's so sad when she's just like, the things I did to you, I'm so sorry. And it's so sad. And they just have this beautiful moment that was really touching. And also the other, like, the left hook on that is before it comes before that. He goes to see his father, and his father has moved on from his mother and has started up a barbershop.
He always wanted to open a barbershop, but he never had the money because he had to take care of Charlie and his mom.
And Charlie decides to go and get a shave from him, and he's getting the shave, and he's fighting with this idea of being like,
I should tell him.
It's me, your boy, Charlie. I'm smart now. And you hear it in him when he's talking about this. And he decides not to. And it's just this heartbreak of regret. Because he knows he's not going to be that smart. He's not going to have that moment again. But he chooses to not upend his father's life as well.
Yeah, to basically let his dad live in ignorance in the same way that his dad was kind of like, let Charlie be ignorant and happy. You know, let him do what he wants to do and don't bother him. And he's like, yeah, I should do the same.
But as a reader, I'm just kind of like, do it.
Just tell him. Just let him know. He would be so happy.
Let that catharsis be. Let there be somebody there. Don't isolate yourself further. And which was a thing that, like, he didn't pick up on. He was further isolating himself. And,
yeah.
But
it's one of those things when we were talking about it before, you had mentioned that. I don't think you mentioned the sister one because that was the moment that got me. Mm-hmm. And we just told people that we had different moments. And now it's, apparently both the one moment with the sister got both of us.
Yeah.
And that one, at least for me, if you're done with your part.
Yeah, and sorry, I thought I was gonna I had the feeling that it was yours, but I didn't want to throw it back to you.
Yeah. It was just, like you said, there's a moment where he goes to meet the sister and expects her to still be as angry as she was when she was a teenager. And she's like, oh, you're here. And they sit down and they have tea. And he's like, I'm surprised you're happy to see me. She's like, why? And he's like, well, when you were younger, you said this, this, and this. And he's like, was I really so mean to you, Charlie? Mm-hmm. And something about that phrase specifically... just because me and my brother used to fight all the time when we were younger. We never got along. And I had almost that exact same moment with my brother at one point where I was just like, oh, I'm surprised you want to work with this. He's like, why? You're my brother. And I'm like, well, you punched me in the face that one time and told me you hated me. He's like, did I? I'm sorry. He's like, I never met, like, this thing that I had carried with me for so long. And, you know, I think I punched him at one point, too. And it was something I always felt bad about. And then I brought it up to him, and he was like, I'm going to be honest, I don't remember that. I think I was drunk at the time.
And, yeah.
And it's just like these things that we allow to affect our relationships for years and years. And so often they're like, you know, all you had to do is just bring it up, and it's just like, oh, I'm sorry, that was my bad.
And yeah, like I also thought that the record smashing moment was something that hit you.
No, I think that was there was another patron, I forget who, I didn't write it down, but they had mentioned there's a point where as Charlie's mental faculties are starting to decline, where he smashes his records in frustration, and then the lady tries to clean him up, and he's like, no, leave him there. I want to be reminded of, like, what I've done. Mm-hmm. And there was another patron who said that, like, they had a mother, I believe, who was, like, a hoarder or had some other kind of, like, mental problems where she would break things and then leave them there and refuse to let people clean them up. And even though it wasn't even, like, super related, something about the way he said it and the way, like, his attitude about it, this giving up of like, no, I want to live in filth, is just like, my heart.
Mm-hmm. Also, speaking of like a similar tangential thing, just because somewhat similar to your with your brother, I never actually got to have that conversation with my brother, and not to bring it down too much, but yeah, that's the part that really hit me about the sister and him. Because he got to have this moment of, I was the one that was terrible to my brother. And sadly, he passed. And the amount of people that tell me that, oh, my brother knew that I loved him and all that stuff, doesn't make me feel less like, oh, I should have apologized so many times for how crappily I treated him.
I mean, that's just the thing in general. Like, you know, you never know when you're going to lose people. Always tell your family you love them. Always tell your friends how much they mean to you.
Mm-hmm.
If you ever get a chance.
Now to talk about funnier and nicer things.
Oh, we don't have a whole lot of funnier or nicer things left.
Damn.
But we did have, there was one question. Frankly, had a whole bunch of talking points. But a lot of them were just sort of like asking what we thought about like plot twists or what we thought about the book in general. And I feel like most of it is covered by the discussion we already had. But he did have one that I feel like is a question that the book itself brings up that might be worth discussing, which is, in general, do you feel like the cons of intelligence outweigh the pros? At least on an individual level. Like, obviously our civilization wouldn't work if we were all, like, kind of dumb.
Yeah.
But, like, was Charlie better off living in ignorant bliss? Or was it better for him to have gained his intelligence and then lost it?
It is that age-old question, is it better to have loved and lost and never to have loved at all?
Yeah, just on a more broader scale.
Yeah, also that's more of a phrase, but yeah.
And I mean, this also, to go into a slight tangent onto, like, there's a lot of other fiction. The biggest one I can think of is Brave New World, which, if you're unfamiliar, that is a dystopian future where society is organized in such a way that people basically have no worries. They work 1 day a week, they can have sex with whoever they want, everything is games, everything is fun, the government gives you drugs, and there's just basically no hardship. And the book really frames that as humanity has lost something because they no longer have the struggle. Because living in ignorant bliss means nothing if you don't have the understanding of why that's so good.
And I think on a societal basis, yes, intelligence gained is a good thing. My thoughts on the idea of on the individual.
Yeah.
I think that much as Charlie, it shouldn't be knowledge shouldn't be doled out in that regard of exponentially, unless you are someone there, if there's something there or someone there to help guide the emotions with it. Because it's much like power, unchecked and uninhibited. It turns into arrogance so quickly.
So you think it's more about the amount of intelligence than just gaining it in general?
Gaining it in general is not bad. I think that intelligence is a wonderful thing. It is to drop it back to it's a God-given thing. It is that we breathed in. But I will say that, like, if too much intelligence puffs up and makes one haughty, and it will isolate because inevitably your intelligence and your perception of your intelligence, if you do not have something around you that makes you understand that you're not the biggest fish in the room, and even if you are, don't see yourself as the biggest fish in the room.
It feels almost like one of those metaphorical math questions where they're like, well, you see, knowledge is power, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Therefore, too much knowledge is corrupting.
Yes.
Transitive property.
Transitive properties, but I would say that too much unchecked knowledge.
Yeah.
Not that I'm saying like we should have 1984 where everybody should just know. Like, don't have somebody who's riding along with you in this intelligence, and don't make them, and try not to make the same mistake as Charlie.
Well, I mean, that's the thing is, obviously, if you look at it more in this specific, like, sci-fi situation of, like, should we grant people super intelligence? Like, yeah, that brings a lot more ethical questions. But I feel like you can almost apply this, like, in general to the like, does the general population need to be educated? Should most people just be free to, like, just do your jobs and enjoy video games and don't worry about it? Let us worry about it.
I feel intelligence should be encouraged, but it does not need to be intrinsically like
the be-all, end-all.
The be-all, end-all, and placing too much value on that intelligence will also make those who have chosen not to pursue its fruits to be ostracized themselves.
At least to me, I've had a problem with a lot of teachers and family members, and this makes it sound almost darker than it is, but a lot of them who are like, kids shouldn't be burdened with problems. kids should remain innocent of everything. I think just back to, like, my education in elementary school, where I was told, like, oh, Christopher Columbus wanted to prove that the Earth was round, and so he sailed around it. George Washington chopped down the cherry tree because he was so honest he couldn't tell a lie. And then, like, getting to middle school and just being like, well, that was a fucking lie. Why did you lie to me? I would rather have... I'm more upset now because I have to relearn everything. If you had just told me from the front, I could have built a worldview around that. The only reason this is bothering me is because it has to change.
I feel like a good thing to temper that with is a quote from a rather eccentric man that I believe you've enjoyed the book of. I don't know if you've read Hogfather. Why must we learn the little lies so we can begin to understand the big lies?
I still don't like I don't like the lies at all. I don't like the concept that, like, children have to have, like, their innocence preserved, that, like, oh, they can't learn about the wider world.
Well, look at the actual giant taste test that we've taken in the last 15 to 20 years. The amount of children that have learned and exponentially grown more. But yet, on the other end, the amount of depression and anxiety and mental problems that have come about because of this knowledge. This is what I mean in the sense that knowledge should be shepherded, not in a way that is hindering, but in a way that is sheltering.
Not in a way that is untruthful, I feel like. I feel like there's gotta be some sort of balance where you can not lie to them without also, like, burdening them with all the horrors of the world all at once.
That's called being a parent.
And that's, unfortunately, social media does not make for a very good parent.
No.
It just kind of shows them anything that would be shocking.
No, social media is a really good nihilistic asshole friend.
And that's the thing I would say is, like, yes, there are a lot of young kids today who are growing up in a very bad way because they have access to unprecedented information. But the weird thing is, it's not as though we're just giving them everything. Because of the way social media and the news and the internet and YouTube algorithms work, they are being shepherded with specific information. It's the most attention-grabbing information, which is often infuriating, often extreme, exaggerated, the most absurd stuff possible that will gain their attention and keep their attention for as long as possible. Yeah. Instead of, what is truthful, they're being shown what is exciting.
Instead of reading Rainbow, they're watching, these books are being burned in...
they're watching Lanky Box. We went to the back rooms to explore, and you won't believe what happened. Shrek called on my phone at 4 a.m. Oh, have you never seen a Lanky Box video?
God, I have not.
You're welcome.
Oh, and we love you.
Do we? Oh, here, 1 second. Let's get a live reaction.
Oh, no.
Just 2 seconds.
You have ruined my life with these sentences you've spoken.
Lanky Box, 38 million subscribers.
Back with a new secret spider poo ending. And today we will show you
fully
exactly how to
refuse.
unlock it. Oh, it's spider poo! In this game, you have to take care of poo at 3 a.m. But he turns super cursed. And we actually get the brand new secret ending and see Spider Poolina, who is his cursed little poo sister. They made the update Nightmare difficulty, and it is one of the hardest...
That's what the kids are watching these days.
I thought the world had turned upside down for Skibbity Toilet.
Oh, he does Skibbity Toilet stuff. Don't
get me
wrong.
I saw Skibbity Toilet in there, but I am...
It's just everything is bright, flashing, arrows. You won't believe the crazy thing that's happened. Lanky Box's mom exposes his real-life secrets. Scariest story games on YouTube. Do not watch. 3 a.m. will come to haunt you. And, what was it? So I learned about this from MBT, because he lives in a neighborhood with a whole bunch of families, and he's thinking about starting a family soon. And, he's like, yeah, I don't think my kid will be allowed to watch Lanky Box. I'm just going to tell him, I'm sorry, Lanky Box died, and then block him on YouTube. He's like, I was talking to other parents, And they're like, oh yeah, of course I let my son watch Lanky Box. He's one of the good ones. You should see the bad ones. They're like, Lanky Box is relatively calm and relatively not clickbait and doesn't try to sell a bunch of sugary drinks, unlike most of the other kids' YouTubers.
This kind of reminds me a lot of those car dealership guys back in the day.
Yeah.
Or the stereo guys that would be like, I'm crazy for giving away prices this good.
Yeah. That's a good point. He does have that car salesman sort of vibe. That's become everything. And I wonder where you could go from here. What's going to be in like 5 more years? Just going to have constant explosions? It is worth noting, after the first 5 minutes or whatever, it just becomes a Let's Play.
I figured.
It's a very repetitive Let's Play where they shout the whole time, but it's not too different from something like Markiplier, except he has like some insight to say occasionally. He's kind of neat.
I'm gonna give my kids a real education. They're gonna watch Civvy.
Yeah.
They're gonna learn about the term greasy.
They're gonna watch Modular.
Yeah, no, I want them to watch Civvy first so they can understand how amazing
time-traveling cyborg and Luddite nemesis John Carmack.
Again, no man bold enough to say, yeah, video games are like porn. They don't need story.
Engineering elemental John Carmack.
I think we've fully gone off the rails.
We've gone completely off the rails. But, if you listen this far, that's what you get. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you had a fun time. Point is, intelligence, good. But I guess here's the thing. Information does not equal intelligence.
Definitely.
Knowledge does not even necessarily equal intelligence. In order to be intelligent, you have to know how to use that knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And while we have access to so much information, very little of that is being delivered in a way that, and it's gone. Lanky Box has ruined my attention span.
Well, I'll put it in a for all you D&D nerds out there. Intelligence is knowing that tomatoes are fruit. Wisdom is knowing that it has no purpose in a fruit salad. Charisma is convincing a chef it deserves to be in there.
Anyway, I hope you enjoyed. I think we're just going to end it here.
Yeah.
I don't know. Thank you to Frankly for doing this. See, unfortunately, we're kind of out of practice because we haven't been doing this a lot. But let us know if you like this episode. If you'd like to see more, who knows? If one of these goes viral, sure.
Well,
I'll chase that money bag, I won't sell out for it or whatever, but if something's popular and people like it, I'll definitely make more.
We should wait till 3 a.m. until the poopy spider appears.
No.
All right.
Skibbity beatbox.
Good luck.
Skibbity Fortnite.
Good luck,
Skibbity Fortnite.
God in heaven, please, good luck. Keep reading.
Keep reading. Have a good one. Thanks again to Frankly.
And we love you.
I don't.
I'm just saying
I
that.
just like you as a friend.
We're talking about just say to the people you care about, well, you love them.
Oh, yeah. I forgot we had a moment there.
Yeah.
Thanks, Lanky Box. You have
ruined the moment.
You've ruined empathy forever.
Lanky Box, you flashed your way into empathy's death.
Anyway, have a good one.
You as well. I don't know why I said you as well. Fuck.